Good morning. What we are looking at here is the female reproductive organs. And just to give you some reference, those are the two umbilical arteries that bracket or run parallel to the bladder there. To give you more points of reference here before we begin, there's the kidney on the left side, and that is the ureter, and we have it mirrored on both sides. So the right has the ureter and the kidney as well. Then we see these two lumps that are mirrored on either side. Those are the ovaries, and the little tubes going from that to the larger tube is the oviducts, and they are both connected to the arterial descending aorta. So these ovaries produce the eggs. They flow down the oviducts and migrate through to the umbilical horns or horns of the uterus, not umbilical horns. And these horns of the uterus are actually where the babies gestate. This is very common in animals that produce large litters, anything above really two animals, and even sometimes one. So they will gestate in the actual uterine horns. The uterus, it comes together as technically a uterus, but that is not where they are gestated. It's the horns of the uterus. And it comes together underneath the bladder there, where they come together, and then ends in the cervix. And we'll see the cervix on the other side in a little bit. Flipping this over, you can see that there's the umbilical cord, but no hole outside of the umbilical cord, meaning also that this is a female. If you look at the back side, you can see that there's actually two holes at the posterior area. One is the anus, and the other one is the urogenital opening. This is the female urogenital opening, it is not the vagina. That extrusion there is the urogenital papilla, and that is how you should name it. But the hole there is the urogenital opening, comma, female. Now, we're going to have to cut a little bit farther into this to see the rest of the female reproductive organs. And you can see I'm going to cut directly and not sever that completely, just the piece of skin. And then I'm going to cut between the muscles in as straight of a line as we can to the tail, or towards that urogenital papilla, which is underneath the tail. And as I'm pushing this apart, I'm cutting through multiple layers of muscle, and then I will get to the pelvic bone. And you can see it splits out pretty easily, and the hips open up pretty well. And then we get to the pelvis. What we need to do with the pelvis is um, we're making sure there's a little bit more space with this. We'll have to draw the scalpel across this, and they're small enough bones at this point where you can take the scalpel and gently cut through it in the same place multiple times, and it'll just kind of open up like that. And there's three bones that you really have to do in the pelvis to open that up, and then all of a sudden it pops open like that. And you'll notice that I actually cut on one side of the urogenital papilla. I do not want to cut it because it'll cut part of the reproductive organs. So I'll do a cut on either side. And what I'm doing here is to get a little bit of opening with the muscle. So I can cut in parallel about half a centimeter on the other side. You can see I'm doing the cuts again, and it opens up that pelvis a little bit more. Then I have this small rectangle of pelvic mass that I'm going to cut into. And you note I'm not cutting into the urogenital papilla or that mass underneath it. I'm trying to pull that chunk of bone out and go parallel underneath it, so I'm not cutting the reproductive organ underneath. So I've removed that pelvic part, and what we can see here is that we have a tube coming out or ending in the urogenital papilla and urogenital opening. And if we clear out enough connective tissue, we can actually find the urethra. And this is usually kind of hidden here, but it hooks into the bladder on the other side. And it has a lot of connective tissue holding it in parallel with the urogenital sinus that we're going to take a look at in a bit. But you can see that I'm using the blunt probe to briefly disconnect some of the tube from the other tube while seeing that it connects to the bladder, the base of the bladder, and it comes out in this urethra. So it takes the urine and puts it into this larger cavity. So the urethra is here, as you can see where the probe is, and you can separate it out a little bit further. Got rid of some of the tissue there just to get out of the way of the camera. But I'm using the blunt probe to kind of clear out some of that connection and it'll be fairly easy, and then it'll stop because it actually fuses with this larger opening or chamber. So I've removed much of the connective tissue here, so you can see how that is a tube, and then it ends in this chamber here. That's the urogenital sinus. Urogenital sinus, that's a larger chamber. And then underneath it, you can see there's another chamber here, and that's the vagina. So the vagina is connected to the horns of the uterus, as shown here and here. And the eggs will gestate in the horns of the uterus, and then once the babies are born, they will pass through the vaginal tract, which is shown right here. And that harder membrane, when you see that ridge there, that's the cervical opening, cervix. And it's a really nicely shown one here where you can see there is actually tissue differences here. And that's the vagina I'm pointing at. So it's not external, it's internal. So we have the cervix and the vagina there. And then posterior to that, we have that connection between the urethra and the vagina, and that's the urogenital sinus again. Of course, after that, there is a urogenital opening where the urogenital papilla is. Good morning. We are going to look at the male reproductive organs in this case. And what you can see first is that this is the urogenital opening. This is the hole underneath the umbilical cord on the ventral side. This would be labeled as the urogenital opening, comma, male, because it is a male thing. The female opening, as mentioned before, is in a completely different area. So we're going to take a very shallow incision along this edge from the on the ventral side from the hole all the way towards the tail. And you want to do it very shallow so you don't cut the penis. But you can see I'm doing a very um, shallow cut here. And right beneath the surface, sometimes you can see it through the skin, and depending on the pigmentation, is that tube. And I'm going parallel with the skin here just to show it underneath the surface, but do not cut deep. Go parallel with it so you're not cutting this tube. And you can see the tube right there, and that is the penis. It's a shared reproduction and urinary tract. Now, I am going to cut further following this cut between the parts of the scrotum here. And I'm going to go straight towards the anus with this. And you can see how it parts pretty easily because the two testes are compartmentalized in their own sac. And I'm still not cutting the penis, but I'm using that as a guide for following this around to the anus. And I'm doing these shallow cuts, and you can see that I'm still following the penis without cutting it. And I am then seeing these two pale sacs there that are the uh, testicles in their scrotal membranes. Sorry about putting my fingers in the way, but I had to get there. Okay, so you can see the penis there and then those pale sacs on either side. And if I use the blunt probe, I can kind of tease them out because they are somewhat separate. There, it has connective tissue that is sometimes tough, but it you can actually pull out that entire scrotal sac. Don't disconnect it, but you can pull it out from its the surrounding tissue. And here's the other one right here. And that's what the sac looks like, but we're going to have to cut into this. So we're going to carefully make sure that we're not cutting into the harder part there, but making a small incision of this sac without cutting what's underneath. And be careful of your fingers, of course, when you're using a scalpel that close. So I just nicked it, and then you can basically squeeze out what is in there and expose what looks like a small bean. So here is the testis, and I'm pulling apart a little bit more of the sac in a crude fashion, so you can see the cord as well. And that whole bundle is the spermatic cord, and you can see that small round bean here. That is the testis or testes. That is the formal name, and that's the name you will use. There is um, this half half coverage around the circumference of it of this uh, membrane, and that's the epididymis. The epididymis, and that goes around like a scallop or around the scalloping feature around that. And this tube that comes from this is the vas deferens, but it goes all the way down and underneath and joins together on the other side of the bladder that we can see in the peritoneal cavity. So that's shown right here. And one tube comes from one side, and the other tube comes from the other side, and then it links in the middle and makes that little loop that you can see there. And that loop is connected underneath to the urethra, which is quite a bit smaller in this case, to see where it connects to the spermatic cord. This is exactly the vas deferens is exactly where we have a vasectomy for males. In humans, they'll cut off both pieces or cut a chunk of it, tie it off, cauterize it to make sure there's no chance of sperm transfer. So those males are artificially sterile. Okay, we're going to cut through the pelvic bone just like we did for the females in a direct line to the tail without cutting the penis. So we'll cut a rectangle of this so we can expose that entire connection there, so, just like the um, female pig. Cutting along this, and you can cut into the bone. It's better not to push too hard. You can just draw it across the surface with a sharp scalpel and make as effective of a cut. And I'm making sure to not cut the penis, but I'm making a cut on the other side into the pelvic wall so I can remove that rectangle of pelvis so we can see the tubes that pass through the pelvis. Again, be careful of fingers. And I'm lifting it up with the forceps, the part of the pelvis that I've cut free, and I'm cutting parallel with this without cutting the stuff underneath. So I'm keeping it horizontal with my cutting instead of vertical. Then I can cut all the connective tissue, keeping the pelvis in, and then remove that part of the pelvis. Okay, so I've removed that. I can see where the penis curved back through the pelvic girdle and then went back inside. And it comes back in there and attaches to the urethra. And the vas deferens comes in there. So we have the bladder and fit in there with the vas deferens and penis there. Okay, now we can push this to the side a bit and find that there is a gland underneath. Hopefully I'll be able to show that to you. I'm pushing it out because dorsal to where the penis comes together with the urethra and the vas deferens, we can get this to the side, and dorsal to this, underneath this, in the pelvic cavity, is something called the bulbourethral gland. And you can see that gland underneath. That's an oval, an elongated oval that's underneath, that's on the dorsal side. And that's the bulbourethral gland. It's usually a very pale color compared to uh, the other parts of the pig there. So you can see that at the end. That concludes the parts of the male urogenital system. Have fun cutting.